You have to learn the rules of the game, and then you have to play it better than anyone else. That's her take on government, and I admire her stamina. But things are different around these parts. And I say, locally, the city administration runs the game, and they own the cards. They do all the dealing, and they cut their own deck. And if you still manage to win, they'll mug you in the alley. The common wisdom that Eugene's form of government is one where council makes policy and the manager implements it is wishful thinking. Or maybe I should call it wistful thinking. Either way, it's not a question of whether the manager has too much power, because the manager has all the power. It is a system that works smoothly when councilors want what management wants. Council policy direction is not sacrosanct, as some might think, and the manager can ignore it when it suits him or her. And managers do ignore it regularly. It doesn't take long for a manager to count to 5 when half the council probably didn't support a motion to begin with, and there will likely be 1 or 2 that are hypersensitive to criticism and would never do anything so controversial as to fire a manager. That gives the manager a lot of latitude to flagrantly ignore council directives. And I have to say this latest situation with the police station is yet another example. When I speak critically of city administration, I make a clear distinction between the administration, upper management, and execs, and the rest of city staff. I've had the pleasure and honor of meeting and working with many talented and community city workers. And I think they'd agree with some of my comments. But they sure wouldn't say it out loud. Eugene city managers have so far been indistinguishable from one another, and I have served with 5. They all aspire to the same International City Manager Association management models. And Dennis Taylor actually had, and was proud of, a managerial motto that was one city, one voice. How scary is that? So, it's time for another topic, police complaint oversight, or as I currently call it, turf wars. It has been 6 years since the City Council started a review of Eugene's police complaint process, and there have been 2 overwhelmingly successful charter amendments. The first creating the auditor's office, and the second strengthening that office and mandating that the auditor and the civilian review board have certain powers and authority. 6 years of discussions and 2 overwhelmingly supportive elections later, and still the city manager and the Eugene Police Department are nitpicking every operational detail and rationalizing every power grab. And of course, the Lane County District Attorney has been back. A few days ago, Alex Gardner publicly supported former Police Chief Lehner's decision to illegally withhold a complaint from the auditor. That I'm referring to the so-called super secret complaint. He used the rationalization that Lehner was protecting the identity of a confidential informant. It just so happens that the police work frequently with confidential informants, so there likely will be more complaints involving confidential informants in the future. And there certainly have been complaints involving confidential informants in the past. Laganya Lara springs to mind, but that's another story. What is important here to remember is that the auditor is not only a qualified professional, but also a lawyer who is bound by confidentiality standards. There is absolutely no justifiable reason to withhold any complaint from the auditor. Our city's constitution, the charter, requires that all complaints go directly to the auditor. And by withholding the complaint, the chief also violated the law by denying the auditor's authority and obligation to oversee the complaint investigation. The auditor did not see the case report until the investigation was closed and stale, and she was completely locked out of the investigation. Interim Chief Kearns determined the complaint was unfounded, and the officer has been exonerated. Unfortunately for the officer and our community, that determination was made without the benefit of independent oversight. Without independent verification that the investigation was fair and thorough, that adjudicated outcome lacks credibility and will always be doubted. Honest, law-abiding officers will be the biggest beneficiaries of a credible and independent complaint process. They deserve to be exonerated beyond a shadow of a doubt, and that requires an independently verifiable, objective investigation, not an internal and secretive process still controlled by the police department. Years ago, while I was researching oversight systems in other cities, I had a conversation with a lieutenant who investigates complaints for Los Angeles Police Department Civilian Oversight System. He said, "You have to accept the fact that you are hiring from the general population and your employee pool is going to reflect the characteristics of the general population. So to the extent the general population is honest and law-abiding, your employees will be too. To the extent the general population has cheaters, liars, criminals, and sexual predators, your employee pool will have some of those too. You have to expect that. You have to be prepared to detect and discipline or remove those folks from your police force. You need a system in place to address the inevitable problems. Denial is dangerous and it's expensive." 2003 was the year of death threats. I think they were trying to discourage me from running for a second term, but only succeeded in being psychologically and emotionally terrifying. I found the first letter in my mailbox on my way to a Metropolitan Policy Committee meeting. I read it on the way and didn't know what to do, but my confusion soon gave way to rising panic. At the meeting, I showed the letter to then interim city manager Jim Carlson, and then I called the principal of my daughter's school. In the ensuing investigation, EPD had access to my home, and they mapped it in case they needed to respond to an emergency. I was interviewed by the detectives, and they were given every bit of personal information they asked for. My daughter and I were under continuous surveillance for weeks. We were extremely vulnerable and exposed. The nature of the threats led us to believe my daughter could be in serious danger. We took them seriously. I did not go public at the time because I didn't want her to know she was the focus. So we told her the threats were against me, and we were being extra cautious by keeping an eye on her. She had to carry a little alarm around with her wherever she went. I can't even describe the impact this had on us or how we managed to cope. Obviously, whoever was sending the threats were using my child to get to me. I was thankful that the media protected her privacy. I was extremely grateful for the sense of security provided by the detectives and officers who were involved in the case and their attempts to find the perpetrators. I still find it hard to reconcile the discovery later on that the very people I was forced to entrust with my family's safety had such an extreme political agenda and were not at all hesitant to express their enmity towards me, either publicly or in supposedly private emails. Lots of elected officials get threats, and I have received other less credible threats. These were professional, and whomever generated them knew how to escape detection. EPD, with the assistance of the FBI, could not detect any identifying characteristics or DNA from the 9 different letters over the 3-month period. The good news is that we were never harmed. The bad news is the threats were politically motivated, and someone who is still out there was willing to terrorize my family in order to get me to shut up and back down.